Well, today we want to talk about how to win friends and influence people. Have you ever heard of that book? There's a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I've always heard about it in association with some sort of a joke. I don't have a good joke for you with it, but I didn't realize, I Googled it and found out it's an actual book that was written, I don't know, probably back in the 1950s by Dale Carnegie, who wrote a bunch of books about motivational speaking and how to be a salesman. And anyway, he wrote this book on how to get along with other people. And so I kind of browsed through the book in preparation for this, and I thought, I wouldn't mind reading that book. I've never read it, but just from the title, it tells you a lot. And really, we have a book that does that. It's this one, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And really, it's something that God calls us to do, is to get along with others. Romans 12:18 says, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Now that's just sort of intuitive. I think everybody realizes that part of being a Christian is getting along with other people. But the problem is when other people don't do what we think they ought to do, or when they wrong us, or when they harm us, or when they do something that we don't expect. That's where the problem comes, and how do we handle those situations? And that's what we want to talk about today. And so hopefully you have your worksheet there. And number one in your worksheet is forgive anybody of anything quickly, no matter how bad it is, and no matter how many times they've done it. That's a tough one. And I'll just confess right off the bat, I'm not very good at this. So I'm getting a lot out of this. Hopefully you are too. But once again, forgive anybody of anything quickly, no matter how bad it is and no matter how many times they have done it. The verse there is Matthew 18:21-22. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? And Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. So Peter comes to Jesus, and I kind of have a feeling that Peter struggled with this getting along with other people thing. He was the guy that when Jesus was arrested, when Judas betrayed him, Peter was the guy that pulled out his sword and chopped off one of the soldiers' ears. And so, he was a guy that kind of took action. He was a guy that retaliated and confronted. And so he would have had a problem with this. And so I'm sure that Peter thought, boy, I'm going to really impress the Lord. I'm going to, Lord, how many times should I forgive somebody? 7 times? I mean, that was really a stretch for Peter. And the Lord's like, no, you don't get it. 70, in other words, as many times as it takes. And that's why we say, forgive quickly, no matter how bad it is, no matter how many times they have done it. Now, I used to work over in Salem at a brokerage firm, and there were about 20 of us in this office. And if you've ever worked in an office, you know that funny things go on in offices with grown-ups. Sometimes grown-ups act like children. And now these were mostly men, but there were some women there as well. And they all dressed very nicely. The men always dressed in suits and ties, and the women were always dressed professionally. And they all drove very nice cars and lived in really nice houses. But one day, we were all issued executive chairs to sit in. And some of the chairs were in better shape than others because they'd been there for a while. And I was fairly new at the time, so mine was not a very good chair. But there was one fellow that he'd been there a long time, and he had a really nice chair. And he walked into the office one day, and somebody had replaced his really nice chair with one of the broken down ones. Now they all looked the same until you sat in them, and then you could tell. And he could tell right away And he was furious that someone had taken his chair. It's kind of like the three bears, who'd been sitting in my chair. And so he began to go around to the different offices and ask everybody, and he came to my office. He said, "Did you take my chair?" And I said, "Roy, no, believe me, I did not take your chair." And he sat in my chair and he, "No, that's not it." And he said, "Well, do you know who did?" I said, "Honestly, I don't know. I don't know." But, so he went on, and he came to another new guy, and that guy, for some reason, his name was Rick, and he said, "No, I didn't take your chair, but it was probably Bruce." Now, why he said that, I don't know. Other than Bruce was kind of a heavy-set guy, and he had a reputation for breaking chairs. And so he just assumed that Bruce probably broke another chair and went and swapped chairs with Roy while he wasn't looking. And so Roy stomped into Bruce's office, and he said, "Rick said, the new guy said that you took my chair." And Bruce said, "I didn't take your chair." And Roy, he went over and sat in that chair, and no, it wasn't it. And so he went on. Finally, he figured out somebody had taken his chair and put it in the conference room and swapped with one of the bad ones that was in the conference room. So he got his chair back after blaming everyone in the office. But I got to tell you, Bruce took offense at what the new guy said, Rick. Rick had said, "It must be Bruce." And it wasn't Bruce. And Bruce took offense at that, and you know what? I was in that office for 17 years, and those two never spoke a word after that. And you say, "Well, that's stupid." But think in your own life. And if you're like me, are there some people that maybe you haven't spoken to, or they haven't spoken to you for a long period of time because of something that happened years ago? I think we can all vouch for that. So anyway, the rule there is, number one, forgive anybody of anything quickly, no matter how bad it is and no matter how many times they've done it. Number two, bitterness is one of the worst sins a Christian can commit because of the consequences we will experience in our own life as a result. Bitterness is one of the worst sins because of the consequences. Hebrews chapter 12 is a similar verse to what we have in Romans, and it says, "Pursue peace with all men." That's what we're talking about here, how to get along with each other. How do we keep this thing going? "And the sanctification without which no one will see the Lord, see to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled." Now there's a lot in that verse. I just want to pick out a couple things. Number one, it talks about falling short of the grace of God. When we fail to forgive somebody right away, then this root of bitterness sets into our hearts, sets into our souls, and it begins to affect us. Now, whenever somebody does offend us, God gives grace. He gives us the grace to forgive that person. The problem is sometimes we resist that grace. Or people around us say, "Well, you can't forgive that person. They did this, and they deserve to be this and that." And and there's all kinds of pressure around us to not forgive them. And when we do that, we are resisting the grace of God. We're falling short of the grace of God. God gives grace both to forgive and to be forgiven. We talk about receiving God's grace. That means that we're forgiven by Him, and it's not because we're such great people or that we deserve it or we've earned it. We don't. That's why it's called grace. It's something we don't deserve, and God gives it to us, and He expects us to, in turn, give it to others. And that doesn't really come natural to us. I don't know if you've watched little kids playing. They don't naturally share. Or if one of them hits one, he's going to get hit back, and maybe even harder. If one bites one, the other one's going to bite them back. They're going to repay evil for evil. That's just kind of the way we're built. And so we have to be trained how to do this thing called forgiveness. Now, the other thing I want to point out about this verse here is that bitterness is compared with a root. And a root is something that you really don't see on the surface. You know, you can be really bitter, or someone can be bitter, and you may not even know it because it's on the inside. We don't see it. Now, eventually it surfaces. But for a while, you can kind of hide it. You can kind of fool people that you're not bitter, but you really are. We don't grow crops at our house, but we do grow a crop of grass. We have a lawn. And so one of the problems with our lawn is that there's this certain kind of grass called velvet grass. I used to call it crabgrass, but somebody corrected me and said, no, that's velvet grass. And it's thicker and it's bigger and it's kind of an ugly grass. And it really stands out in your lawn. And so we like to get rid of that. Well, so I started picking that stuff out of the lawn and out of the garden areas. And what I discovered was it's got these roots that just go forever. And I told my wife, I think all those roots are connected downtown somewhere. You know, it's all networked together. Because you start pulling one little blade and you just discover a whole network of roots. And it's almost impossible to get rid then of that velvet grass, because wherever there's a root, every time it rains, then it's going to produce more velvet grass. And so that's kind of the way bitterness is. Once it gets a root and gets a start in our lives, it's hard to get rid of. But we want to talk today about how we can get rid of bitterness. And, you know, bitterness has been compared to a pill. Have you ever heard somebody say, well, that was a real bitter pill to swallow? And so it is like a pill. And we have this idea, I know I do, that if I just get bitter and if I give somebody the silent treatment, or if I kind of frown at them or, you know, look down on them because something they did to me, they hurt me, my feeling is that by doing that, I'll be able to hurt them. They'll feel the pain that I felt. And you know, just the opposite is true. That's like swallowing poison and expecting someone else to get sick. It doesn't work that way. You're the one that gets sick. It eats at you. They could probably care less. They've probably forgotten all about the situation. But it eats away at us when we don't get rid of bitterness, when we don't forgive right away. Have you ever prayed the Lord's Prayer? I think you all know it. We're not going to say it today, but you know that part where it says, forgive us our debts as we forgive others, the debts of others. Did you ever think about that? Lord, forgive me just like I forgive other people. What if I don't forgive other people? What if I harbor bitterness? What if I don't forgive right away? And Jesus even it takes time to explain that whole phrase at the end of the prayer. He says, if you don't forgive others, God won't forgive you. Now, I don't think he's talking about our eternal salvation there, but I think he's talking about our experience in this life, our prayer life. If we don't forgive others, are we going to have a strong prayer life? You know, like Sandy was saying, we need prayer warriors. We need people to pray. But if we're not forgiving others, is God going to listen to our prayer? Probably not as attentively as he would if we did forgive people. And so this is really important that we forgive other people. Number 3, bitterness is taking offense at the unkind, rude, inconsiderate, selfish, immature words and actions of others, and then not forgiving them quickly. So bitterness is taking offense and not forgiving them quickly. And the verse there is Colossians 3:12 and 13. It says, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, and forgiving one another. It's right there. Now, we say that we need to do this quickly. And if you're like me, you kind of like to hold on to the bitterness just a little bit, just to kind of wallow in it. And that's not a good thing. Bitterness and forgiveness is like this. You ever take a candle when you were a little kid and you ran your finger through it, and it didn't hurt you? And then you ran it through again, it didn't hurt you. Have you ever taken your finger and just held it in the candle? You don't want to do that. It will burn you. And that's the way bitterness is. You can hold it for just a moment, and then you got to get rid of it, or it will burn you. It will do damage. The other night, Anne cooks for the Celebrate Recovery every third Tuesday, I believe it is. She, and some of you have helped with that. I know Andrea a lot, and some of the others of you. But she was fixing this dinner for the Celebrate Recovery Tuesday night. And she said, honey, can you see that hot pan or bowl of whatever? And yeah. She said, can you carry that out to the car? And so I saw this bowl with the hot stuff in it, and it was sitting on this pan. And I wasn't thinking very clearly. There were a couple hot pads there. And so I just thought, well, if I pick up the pan, I'll be okay. It's the bowl that's hot. Well, what I didn't realize was the pan was in the oven too. And I put my hands on the edge of those, and whoa, right away, I could feel the heat. But you know what? It didn't do any damage because I got my hands out of there right away. And Ann said, go over to the sink and put cold water on it. I did. And I wasn't harmed at all. But if I would have held my hands on there for any length of time, I could have had third-degree burns. It was hot. Came right out of the oven. So we used to play a game when we were kids called Hot Potato. And I don't remember exactly how the game went, but it involved a ball or a bean bag. And as soon as you caught it, you had to get rid of it real quick, or you were it. And that's the way forgiveness is. We need to forgive quickly so that it does not do damage. I was working this week up in Washington, and when I'm on the road, I stop at convenience stores a lot because they're convenient. And you can go into a convenience store, you can pick up a soda and maybe a bag of peanuts or a bag of chips or beef jerky or whatever you're after, and you just take it up to the counter and it's like, okay, you're the only person there, and you're out of there in a minute. I like that. I don't like to wait. Well, I went into this convenience store, and there was one clerk, and there happened to be this lady about my age. And, I'm getting to the age where we're kind of technically challenged with certain things like credit card machines and ATMs and all that. Well, she was having a tough time, and she was trying to buy this thing, and she wanted to use cash, and she didn't have cash. And so the clerk was working very patiently with her, trying to explain everything. And she had a million questions about what she was buying. And then finally she decided, well, she needed to use the ATM machine, but she didn't know how to use it. And so the clerk, and all this time, I'm looking at my watch. I'm in a hurry. I got to get to my next job. And I'm freaking out. And I'm starting to should I chew out this lady, or should I chew out the clerk, or should I just chew them both out? And then a little voice in my head said, hey, Steve, how's that sermon coming? That sermon, it's on forgiveness. And it's about forgiving people quickly and not blowing up. And so I said, okay, Lord, yeah, I can do this. And so I did. And it didn't take all that much longer. But it's something that we all struggle with. These things come up when we least expect them, and they're part of our everyday life, really. I mean, some of them aren't life-threatening, but some of them are. Some of them are really serious that we carry around for years and years and years. But every day we face this kind of thing. Number 4, God forgives us not because we deserve it, but because of His grace. God forgives us not because we deserve it, but because of His grace. And you know this verse, Romans 5:8. But God demonstrates His love, His own love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You know, God didn't wait until we got our act together to forgive us. Praise God for that. It may have never happened, in my case. He forgave us when we were still His enemies. When we were still sinners, He stepped in with grace and forgave us. Did we deserve it? No, we didn't, but He forgave us anyway. When I was a kid, we lived on Jackson Street in Monmouth. In fact, we lived near where Jay's Restaurant is. And there was a family a couple blocks up Jackson Street toward where our new building is going to be. And the kids in that family were about the same age as myself and my sisters. And our moms were good friends, and so we did a lot of things together. And then eventually they moved over to Silverton. And when the fella that was my age, he got his license when he was 16. And so this would have been about when I was in high school. And he was driving home from an athletic event or something. And he had his sisters with him in the car. And this was back in the days before it was required to buckle up your seatbelt. And so nobody did. You know, we all had seatbelts, we didn't buckle them. And so he was driving along, and he had a green light in an intersection, and so he went through, and a drunk driver ran a red light, plowed into them. His sister flew from the back seat through the windshield and died on the scene. It was tragic. Now, suppose that happened to you. Suppose a drunk driver plows into your car and kills one of your kids or one of your grandkids. That'd be devastating, wouldn't it? I hope that hasn't happened to anyone here. But my question to you is, could God, and let's say that the person that was responsible for that was genuinely repentant, very sorry for what happened, could God forgive that? Yeah, He can, can't He? He's God. He forgives us. Not because we deserve it, but He's able to forgive anything. And He does. Could you forgive that person? Ugh, that's the hard one. And the truth is that you can. You could forgive that person. Well, but how? How would you do it? And I've shared this with you before, but it's number 5. And we've actually got it written down today. And here's how you do it. I choose to forgive, and then there's a blank. And you just put so-and-so in there, because usually they're a so-and-so. Not because he or she deserves it, but because God has forgiven me, and I certainly do not deserve it. I think you have to go to the back of your page to fill that in, or you can just fill it in there. I choose to forgive whoever it is, not because he deserves it, or she. They probably don't. But because God has forgiven me, and I certainly don't deserve it. And the verse there is Colossians 3:13, bearing with one another and forgiving each other. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. So we forgive because God forgave us. And that's what he expects us to do. All right, now we want to go a step beyond. This is all kind of review. We went over this a few months ago. It's kind of review. We hit it from a little different angle. But I want to take it one step further today, and that's number 6. God also expects us to show mercy. And the verse is Luke 6:36-38. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. And do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Pardon, and you will be pardoned. Give, and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you in return. Now, let's go back to that drunk driver. Does God forgive him or her? Yes. And let's say that you forgive that person. And praise God that He gives you the grace to do that. Now, here's the next question. Is that person going to jail? Yeah. Even though God forgives them and you forgive them, the judge is still going to send that person to jail because there are consequences of sin. We get forgiven of sin, but there's still consequences. There's a price to pay. But here's where mercy comes in. Here's where mercy differs from forgiveness. Mercy has to do with the consequences. It has to do with removing the judgment or the sentence that's attached to the sin. Now, this is really good news for us because we know that we're all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ, even Christians. And even before that, even in this life, Hebrews says that whom the Lord loves, He disciplines and chastens, just as a father does a son or a daughter. This is how you do your children. We are His children, so He disciplines us. And wouldn't you like to have some mercy while all that's going on? I would. I want all the mercy I can get. Well, you know how you get mercy? You gotta give it yourself. When we give mercy to others, then God gives mercy to us. And the measure that we use to show mercy to others is the measure that He uses for us. And man, when you understand that, it's like, whoa, I need to really forgive people and get rid of that and just show them mercy and be on our way. Number 7, the more mercy we extend to others, the more mercy we get from God. I must be out of time. The mic went out. That's how they cut me off now. The battery went dead. I outlasted the battery. Okay, so you guys are off the hook. All right, the more mercy we extend to others, the more mercy we get. And the verse there is Matthew 5:7. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain what? Mercy. Yeah, pretty straightforward. So the way we do it is the way we get. And here's the key. I've got a granddaughter, and when she was about 5 years old, we were over in the we were over in the Christian church. And they have these round tables. And there was some kind of a party with balloons, and she was running around chasing those balloons, and she was just about the height of that table, all those tables. And inevitably, she ran into one of the tables and bumped her head, and we all thought, oh no, he's screaming and crying, here we go. She bounced back up to her feet and says, I'm okay. I'm okay. And started chasing the balloons again until she bumped her head again. Down she went, I'm okay. I'm okay. And I don't know how many times she did that. I think she might have had concussions. But she did it because she was thrilled to chase those balloons and nothing else mattered. And you know, when we see the mercy of God in our lives, then we're free to say, I'm okay, or it's okay. And when these terrible things happen to us, or somebody cheats us, or somebody pulls in front of us on the freeway or in a parking lot, it's okay. We're going to heaven. We're spending eternity in heaven. It's okay. We'll get over it. Yeah. All right. Let's stand and sing our closing chorus.